Today we will start last large topic by normal physiology in this semester, physiology of digestion. And after this topic, we finish some partial questions on clinical physiology. And first of all, you should know that our digestion, its main process, which required for receiving food and transport nutrition to our tissues, to our organs, for energy supply, for plastic structure supply, and main components which including this function named digestive system. All this digestive system consists from gastroesophageal stomach, intestine, and several additional glands like liver and pancreatic gland, which include in processes of digestion. And digestive process work one by one for transformation of food, for mechanical breaking down, for chemical breaking down, and for absorption result of breaking down. Main role of this breaking down is transforming nutrients in our food from large polymeric molecules in small size monomeric molecules, because many types of food consist from proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and all these substances, it's polymeric molecules which consist from long size chains and could not absorb in our intestine. And for breaking down, we need many additional components, like you may find oral cavity, stomach, intestine, and so on. And today we start a discussion about digestive system from oral cavity, because food came in this place for first transformation, for mechanical breaking down. In our oral cavity, we produce saliva by salivary glands, and with help of saliva, food mixed and formed a specific mixing with of particles of food and saliva, which named bolus. Bolus, it's quite compact parts of food which make swallowing, and after swallowing start digest in stomach. In our oral cavity, for producing bolus from large pieces of food, we need chewing our food, and main role in this process belong to teeth. With help of muscles, we start chewing automatically, even with stimulation of mechanical receptors in our oral cavity. That's why chewing gum is so popular. You may put this uh, gum in our oral cavity and start chewing without food as a result of mechanical stimulation. For producing bolus, we need saliva, and saliva produced by many glands in our oral cavity. We have three large salivary glands. It's parotid gland, submandibular, and sublingual glands, which produce main amount of saliva. These glands activity depend from food intake. When food or some other components placed in our oral cavity and stimulate receptors in our oral cavity, these glands produce saliva. Chewing gum again will start produce saliva by these main salivary glands. But when our oral cavity is empty, without mechanical stimulation of receptors, these glands are not active and don't produce many saliva. But in periods of time when our oral cavity is empty, we still have activity of small glands. These small glands are placed in all places of our oral cavity and produced saliva for prevent dry mouth, for produced nutritions for our own tissues like teeth, muscles. That's why we have saliva production during all period of our life, during every moment, but intensity of saliva production depends from types of glands which active in this moment. Without food in oral cavity, it's small amount of saliva from small glands. With food intake, it's many saliva from our large salivary glands. Saliva, it's liquid which consists, of course, from water, but additionally, we have many specific components which realize many functions of saliva. These components are like proteins, they work like enzymes, electrolytes, they need for teeth nutrition, for normalized pH level in our oral cavity. We have some amino acids and peptides which work like hormones and regulate intensity of metabolic processes in our oral cavity. We have some cells. It may be immune cells, leukocytes. It may be microorganisms, because in our oral cavity we have oral bacteria which normally take place. In some pathological processes, additionally, we may have, find viruses, fungi, and pathogenic bacteria. But main component of saliva which require for digestive functions, it's of course proteins. These proteins produced by salivary glands, and mostly it's large salivary glands. These glands take liquid part of plasma and filtrate from formed elements, and additionally secrete in this liquid part proteins which divide on subgroups. We have many subgroups like amylases, lipases for digestion of some components in our food. For example, amylases, it's proteins which start digestion of starch in our oral cavity. Lipases start digestion of fats, but actually lipases are not very active in adults. They may take place in oral cavity of newborns, babies, but with aging, activity of these enzymes decreased, and role of these enzymes in oral cavity not so important. And many additional proteins like stadherins, cystatins, histatins, protein-rich proteins, proline-rich proteins, lecithin. All these proteins realized additional functions for digestion. They used for depot water, for example, and with help of proline-rich proteins and histatins, our water fixate in saliva. With help of lecithin, we realized protective function for destroying pathogenic microorganisms and viruses which may take place in food. That's why these small components are very active and realized additional functions of saliva for normalizing food, for normalizing structure, pH, temperature of food, for immunic activity and change level of pathogenic microorganisms in food, and so on. Regulation of saliva activity realized with help of neurohormonal processes, but mostly our neuron system active for regulate volume of saliva and quality of saliva. So, for example, we have several steps of regulation, saliva activity, and salivation. And Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov was one of famous scientists who discovered these processes of regulation, and received Nobel Prize for discovering regulation of digestive processes. And he found that saliva production increased in 3 stages. First stage, he named appetite saliva, when we, for example, see a food think about food, uh, but didn't eating this food. We only preparing for eating, and in this moment our salivation may increase, and this process regulate by our conditional reflexes. Other steps, second step, when food came into our oral cavity, saliva additionally produced, and level of saliva in our oral cavity additionally increased. And for these processes, regulation require unconditional reflexes, which start from receptors in our oral cavity and came into brainstem, into centers for sympathetic and parasympathetic stimulation. And normally for saliva producing with help of unconditional reflexes, we need activity of both branches in autonomic neuron system. We need parasympathetic stimulation for increased volume of saliva, but this saliva is very this saliva consists mostly from water and have very low ability for digestion. And sympathetic activity produce more proteins, and this is good for digestion, but viscosity of saliva is very high. So for normal salivation, we need as water in saliva as proteins. We need both sympathetic and parasympathetic regulation. And some examples which demonstrate a role of conditional and unconditional reflexes in salivation you may find in your books. You may find about Pavlov's dog, but actually it's not very interesting for memorizing. For memorizing, it would be better imagine that you eating a lemon, and in this case, if you think about lemon, you may feel increased salivation in your oral cavity. And next example demonstrate why this thinking about food, it's unconditional reaction. Sorry, conditional, but not unconditional reaction. It's some types of food which you don't eating. For example, tell me please, who eating this fruit? No one.
No, sir.
Mm. And you didn't feel salivation in your oral cavity, like in previous picture when you see a lemon and think about lemon. Is it true?
No, sir, I have
Yes,
a
sir.
You have salivation in
Yes, sir.
this moment?
Yes.
No, sir.
And salivation when you see lemon, same or greater?
While saying lemon, salivation
It's
is
great, sir.
sir.
It's great,
But
yes.
this one, yeah, it's not.
Mm. And if you didn't eat in some other kinds of fruits, like durian, for example, your salivation don't increase. They may be same or even less. They decrease. But why I give this example? If you open Wikipedia, you may find that durian named most good taste fruit on the earth, but especially durian, which grown in Singapore. We have two types of durian, one growing in India, and I think most of you eating them, but with other name. It's not very tasty. Other growing in Singapore and have better taste, but very bad smell. And only those persons who actually eating them and like this taste produced salivation with this type of food. So this example demonstrate a role of conditioned reflexes in salivation. You produce saliva when you see food, when you think about food, when you tell about food, only if you have previous experience with this food. Both conditional and unconditional regulation of saliva need for realizing many functions of saliva. You should know that saliva take place not only in digestion. Of course, they take part in breaking down of starch. Previously, I told about this. But you should remember about additional functions like lubrication, for example, forming of bolus and swallowing of this bolus, additional functions, protection from dry mouth, from hot and cold food, from very dry food, from some chemical substances in food, like acids, for example, and protection from microorganisms which may increase concentration in our oral cavity, and this may lead to destroying our teeth. That's why increasing salivation before and after food intake realized all these functions. And again, I remind you, for all these functions, we have many components in saliva. Most of these components for realized specific functions, it's proteins. And these proteins, like histatins, cystatins, mucin, and many other, realized not digestive but protective functions. Total amount of saliva is vary and depend from intensity, frequency of digestion, and quality of food. We may say in average that we produced about 1.5 2 liters of saliva every day. So during our life, we produced amount of saliva equal to 2 swimming pools. Next component of our oral cavity, which we used for digestion, it's our tongue. And our tongue realized again several functions for digestion. First of all, it's formation of bolus and start swallowing, and additional functions of tongue. It's taste reception, because tongue has many receptors for analyzing taste of food. You may find in this picture different types of receptors, and in nowadays we have several main tastes. By the way, anybody remember from our previous lectures which main tastes our tongue can recognize? How many basic tastes we have? Nobody remember?
Sweet and sour.
Salty, bitter.
Sour,
That's all?
sweet, salty, and sour.
You correctly named 4 tastes: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and additionally we have 5th taste, umami, and all other tastes. It's mixture of basic tastes, and for every this basic taste we have receptors on our tongue. This ability for analyzing taste of food highly important for regulation, salivation, and digestion in oral cavity. Because, for example, if our sweet receptors activated, they send impulses in our brain about presence of glucose in food, and as a result, brain preparing stomach and intestine for digestion and absorption carbohydrates. We need specific enzymes for digesting carbohydrates. If we have umami taste, it's signal for produced mostly enzymes for digestion. Different tests we need for change intensity of digestion, as in stomach, intestine, preparing them for different types of food, as for digestion in oral cavity with feeling bitter, for example, or salty, we need increased amount of saliva producing. That's why tongue have very important role in digestion in our oral cavity. Next component of oral cavity which take part in digestion is teeth. And we have how many teeth?
32.
Yes, but only if we tell about adults, because we have two generations of teeth. Yes, we have deciduous teeth, which produced in first year after birth, and changed about 4 or 5 years old. They start changing into permanent teeth. But speed of this changing is very usually only after puberty period last permanent teeth growing and realized all functions of teeth. What's functions have these components of our oral cavity? First of all, it's mechanical destruction of food. We need destroy food into many small size particles for form bolus for easily swallowing food. And we have two main groups of teeth. It's incisors, which easily cutting hard pieces of food, and we have molar teeth, which are important for mostly mechanical breaking down plants and all food which consists from fibers. In previous century, it was many theories about humans' generation, and some scientists say that human produced from monkeys, but it was good monkeys, which was vegetarians and eating fruits. But other scientists say that no, humans produced from bad monkeys. They was predators. They like to eat meat. And in nowadays, only one theory is correct. Depend from teeth in our oral cavity. How do you think which theory is correct?
Maybe the monkeys are omnivores.
Again, please.
Maybe the monkeys are omnivores, eating both vegetables and meat.
Actually,
Like baby
Okay.
chimpanzees.
no. In evolution, we generate from bad monkeys, which eating all types of food, not only fruits, and this is result of analyzing teeth, because all predators have specific type of teeth. They named canine teeth, and these teeth are not useful for vegetarians, but they're useful only for predators, because these teeth help for cutting of meat. So unfortunately, we are not good, but we are bad monkeys. Okay, next process which take place in our oral cavity after activity of teeth, salivary gland, and tongue. It's swallowed. After forming bolus, we swallowing this bolus and continue digestive process in other parts of our digestive system. Swallowing consists of 3 stages. First stage is conditional, and we may regulate this process with our consciousness. When we form bolus, we place this bolus on our tongue, and during all process of movement of bolus on tongue, we may stop swallowing or make them faster. But next stage, when bolus came into back part of tongue, bolus stimulate mechanical receptors which placed on the back side of tongue, and these receptors start unconditional reflex of swallowing. Scheme of this unconditional swallowing you may find in this picture. After start second stage of swallowing, tongue moves upward for a block bolus and don't give ability for them return to oral cavity, and moved upward palatine, soft palatine, for block bolus and don't give ability for them move in nasal cavity, and blocked muscles which protect our trachea and don't give ability for bolus to put in this part of respiratory system. So for bolus, it's only one way into esophagus, and when bolus came from tongue into esophagus, start a third stage when bolus moved into upper esophagus. This process again regulate by unconditional reflexes and realized with muscles of esophagus. Muscles of esophagus divide on 2 groups, longitudinal and circular, and during this stage of swallowing, circular muscles relax and longitudinal muscles contract, and as a result bolus moved forward from oral cavity to stomach. If we drink water or other liquids, all these processes is very fast, and second stage of swallowing not very important, because with help of gravity, liquids may move downward to stomach. Process of swallowing we may use not only for food intake, but for additional function of normalizing pressure in middle ear. You know from anatomy that our nasopharynx, which attach with oral cavity, have Eustachian tube, and this tube open into middle ear. When our external environment have changed pressure, for example, atmospheric pressure very high or very low, through Eustachian tube, this pressure equalized pressure in middle ear, and this is highly important for normal transmitting of signals to inner ear and to good hearing. If process of changed atmospheric pressure is very fast, we need additional activity of smooth muscles for open Eustachian tube and for normalizing pressure in middle ear. You may understand a role of this process during flying by plane. When you're flying, you may feel some discomfort in your ears, and you know that after swallowing many times, this discomfort disappears. It's a result of normalizing air pressure in middle ear, and for normalizing again we use swallow. So this is additional function of our oral cavity, and process of swallowing take place not only in food intake. But let's return to digestive processes. And digestive processes after swallowing food came through esophagus into stomach. Before entering into stomach, food, especially hard food or bolus, meet a lower esophagus sphincter, which normally closed and prevent back propagation of bolus from stomach into esophagus. And for opening this sphincter, we used local regulation with help of mechanical pressure on receptors in this region of sphincter. Neurons activated and open for food. This sphincter, smooth muscles relaxed, and food came into stomach. After this entering, sphincter closed again. In children's and in some patients with anatomical specificity or with problems in digestive system, the sphincter may don't work properly. And as a result, reflux may happen. Reflux is back propagation of food from stomach into esophagus. In children, especially in newborns, babies, and uh, first 6 months, it may be normal, but with aging, sphincter work better and prevent back propagation of food. So in adults, reflux it's not normal and need to be corrected by a gastroenterologist. As a result of all previous activities in oral cavity and in esophagus, food came in stomach, and stomach is next region of digestive system, which highly important for some processes. And stomach, have a specific form. They look like sac and have elastic walls. Stomach may stretch very well, and in adults, capacity may vary, may increase up to several liters, but usually in normal healthy adults, volume of stomach not prevent 1.5 liters. And stomach have several parts. You should know names of these parts. It's a fundal part, upper part of stomach. Pyloric part, it's connection between stomach and small intestine. Near the pyloric part, antral part, antrum take place, and main part between antrum and fundal part, it's body of stomach. Additionally, in stomach, we tell about curvature, greater and lesser, or curvature major and minor in Latin language. These names help us for describing where in stomach placed some processes. An additional region between esophagus and stomach named cardia, where food came into stomach and after then uh, transferring through body to antrum to pyloric part. Walls of stomach consist from 3 layers, and in our inner organs, only 2 of them have 3 layers. Tell me, please, do you know which one, together with stomach, have 3 muscle layers, 3 types of muscles in the walls? You keep silence because you don't know or you didn't listen.
ده serosal layer, sir.
No, I asked about 3 layers of muscles. You may see in this picture in
Longitudinal, circular, and oblique.
yes, longitudinal, circular, and oblique. It's 3 layers of muscles in walls of stomach. And it's highly specific because most all inner organs, stomach, esophagus, small intestine, large intestine, uh, and so on, have only two layers of muscles, longitudinal and circular. And I ask you, do you remember, because previously I told you about this, which other inner organ have three layers of muscles?
Urinary bladder.
No. No other ideas?
Uterus.
Mm-mm. Actually, it's heart. And previously we have lecture by heart, and I told you in heart we have three layers of muscles, and I told you that it's similar to stomach. And as heart as stomach, with help of oblique layer of muscles, have ability for mixing inner components. In heart, it's blood. In stomach, of course, it's food. For better mixing of food, for increasing pressure for food, we need a third layer of muscles. Additional anatomical property of stomach, it's gastric ridges and its folds you may see in this slide. And these folds, first of all, give ability for good stretching of stomach, and second, help for movement food and gastric juice from fundal part into antral part and into pyloric part of stomach. Stomach realized many functions for digestion. It's mechanical breaking down of food, chemical breaking down of food, it's storage of food, it's absorption, several types of food, it's protection from toxins, for example. That's why stomach is very important. And additionally, stomach realized regulation of digestion because stomach have their own hormones they produced from stomach and came to small intestine, into pancreas, and change activity of these regions for increased or decreased intensity of digestion. Main component of stomach, it's gastric juice, which produced for digestion and for realizing these functions of stomach, and gastric juice produced by specific glands. Glands placed in all inner parts of stomach, but mostly these glands placed in fundal part. This is most active glands, and they produced many highly active gastric juice. In other parts, like pyloric part of stomach, gastric juice produced, but not so active, and mostly they include mucin for lubrication of food, not for chemical destroying of food. Components of gastric juice, especially active gastric juice, which produced in fundal part, it's hydrochloric acid and pepsin, two main components. But additionally, gastric juice have small amount of other substances, like enzymes for chemical breaking down carbohydrates, amylases, lipases for breaking down fats. But you should know that these components for breaking down carbohydrates and fats are mostly present in children's stomach. In adults, these components not very active, like in oral cavity, and stomach don't take part in intensive breaking down these components of food. Only pepsin is active component of gastric juice in adults for digestion of proteins. And additional very important component of gastric juice, it's intrinsic factor of Castle. This component produced by fundal part and realized for good hemopoietic function. That's why if person after some traumas or operations don't have active glands in fundal part of stomach, a person may suffer from anemia. Person's blood have a low amount of red blood cells, and this is very serious state, because without stomach, our components of food like ferrum, vitamins are not associated with red blood cells, and anemia take place. And next test for presence for you. How do you think why in children's hospital in Germany several years ago tested new coins? What they do with these coins in children's hospital? And again, no ideas. So all students is absent.
No, sir.
But why
Sorry,
you
sir?
didn't answer me?
No, sir, we don't have any idea.
You may simply say about this. I wait your answer. Okay, actually, children's try to swallowing all small size pieces and not only food. They like to swallow coins. And when in Europe was producing new coins, they test metal from these coins. Is this metal will destroyed by gastric juice or not? That's why only coins which are not dissolved by gastric juice may be safe, and even if children swallowing them, metals will not toxic for children's stomach, for children's body. Okay. Next, what you should know about stomach and glands in stomach. It's components of these glands. You may find in this picture every gland consists from several layers and several types of cells. It's chief cell, parietal cell, neck cell, and these types of cells used for producing different components of gastric juice. For example, chief cell produced pepsin, its main enzyme for digestion of proteins. Parietal cells produced hydrochloric acid, and mucous cell produced mucin for protect our own cells in stomach from hydrochloric acid and from pepsin. Additionally, a small amount of cells in stomach, mostly it's G and D cells. It's cells of Epwood system. It's hormonal active cells, and they produce hormones like gastrin, serotonin, and somatostatin. That's why one of functions in stomach, it's endocrine function, take part in regulation of digestive processes with help of their own hormones produced by these Epwood cells. Total amount of gastric juice, like total amount of saliva, may vary, depend from amount of food, types of food, quality of food. But in average, we say about 1.5 liters of gastric juice per day. And due to presence of hydrochloric acid, gastric juice have very low pH during food intake and increased activity of stomach, they produce gastric juice with pH about 1. You know, it's acid-base pH, but between food intake and when stomach is empty, pH increased because stomach stopped produced hydrochloric acid, and pH near the normal, near the 7. Why we need in our gastric juice hydrochloric acid? First of all, this acid work like activator. They necessary for activation pepsinogen. Second component of gastric juice, pepsin, produced in inactive form and convert into active form, pepsine, which may take part in digestion only in low pH. That's why it's necessary for normal digestive activity of enzymes in our stomach. But additionally, hydrochloric acid regulate activity of hormones in our stomach and decreased activity of producing gastrin, for example. Next function of hydrochloric acid, it's protective function, because low pH may kill almost all bacteria in the food. They need for neutralizing toxins and bacteria. Second component of gastric juice, pepsin. I told you they produced in inactive form and named pepsinogen. After came from glands into stomach into gastric juice, pepsinogen activated by hydrochloric acid and convert into pepsin. Actually, it's group of proteins. We have several types of pepsinogens. Common for all these proteins, it's a role in digestion of proteins. Different molecules may have different activity, intensity of pepsinogenic activity, and different level of pH for activation. And it's mostly important for growing, because in babies, pepsinogen are more active with quite high pH, about 3.5. And in adults, other types of pepsinogens produced, they may better work with lower pH, and it's helpful for children's stomach, which could not produce many hydrochloric acid. And when adults can do this, they have more active types of pepsinogens for digestion. Next component of gastric juice, I told you about them. It's inner Castle's factor. It's protein which associate with vitamin B12 and protect this vitamin from destroying in our stomach. Normally, vitamin B12 is large size molecule, which may breaking down by gastric juice. And only this inner factor of Castle can protect vitamin from destroying in stomach. Role of vitamin B12 in our body, its stimulation of red blood cells production. That's why normal activity of gastric juice lead to normal production of red blood cells. Abnormal activity of gastric juice, abnormal activity of stomach, destroying of axanthic cells in stomach's walls lead to anemia when our body destroy vitamin B12 and don't absorb them. It may lead to decreased amount of red blood cells. And last component of gastric juice is mucin. Main role of mucin is protection. They protect walls of stomach from destroying with pepsin and with hydrochloric acid. But even with presence of mucin, gastric juice is a very aggressive substance and destroying of cells not stopped but only slowing down. With help of mucin, we destroy by gastric juice our cells in stomach, not instantly, during 1 or 2 days. That's why every day we produce new cells in our stomach, and complete renovation of cells in all stomach require about 1 month. Every month we have other stomach because all cells in inner layer of stomach are renovated. But it's a result of proteolytic function for in gastric juice. Regulation of stomach activity, again neurohumoral and mostly role of neuron system take place. First stage of regulation, it's activation of gastric juice production when food came in our oral cavity. With help of parasympathetic neuron system, signals came from our oral cavity from mechanical and chemical receptors in mouth into brain, and activation of parasympathetic neuron system lead to produced in oral cavity additional portions of saliva, and in stomach lead to production many gastric juice. This gastric juice start producing for early activation of pepsinogen and preparing to eating a food. That's why normally after starting chewing, food should came into stomach, and in this case, gastric juice will digest food and neutralize, hydrochloric acid will neutralize by components of foods. If you put something in your oral cavity, like chewing gum, for example, but activation of gastric juice production take place, neutralization of gastric juice not take place. This may lead with time to destroying inner walls of stomach, and persons who like chewing gum may with ages suffer from gastritis, because normally after stimulation of our receptors in oral cavity, we should put food into stomach. Next stage of neural regulation take place when food came into the stomach, and in this case neural regulation realized with help of local reflexes. What it means? In walls of our stomach we have neural plexus, many neural plexuses, which work like autonomic neuron system. They may occur signals from receptors in walls of stomach and translate to signals for muscles of stomach and for glands in stomach. And as a result, activation of stretch receptors, of mechanical receptors in stomach may change intensity of gastric juice production and intensity of contraction for walls and stomach. This is second stage regulation gastric juice secretion. And in those periods when food came in stomach, together with autonomic neuron system, together with regulation by plexus in stomach, start hormonal regulation of stomach activity. And hormonal regulation realized with help of glands in stomach. Previously, I told you about Aput system, and this system realized hormonal regulation in stomach. Usually, main hormone which stimulate activity of stomach and producing more gastric juice, it's hormone gastrin, which start secretion in first period of digestion when food came in oral cavity and start came in stomach, but activity of gastrin regulate with help of negative feedback. What it means? Gastrin produced more hydrochloric acid, but hydrochloric acid block gastrin production. This is highly important for prevent overactivity of stomach. In abnormal situations, when this negative feedback don't work normally, our stomach may increase hydrochloric acid secretion, and this may be dangerous for our stomach, for whole our body. That's why normally local activity, humoral activity should regulate themselves with negative feedback mechanisms. Additionally, for negative feedback, we have hormones like somatostatin, which combine to gastrin activity. And in nowadays, several new hormones discovering. First of them is ghrelin, which stimulate as gastric juice production in stomach, as additionally ghrelin stimulate our neuron system and especially hypothalamus. If you feel hungry, for example, mostly this feeling associated with high level of ghrelin in your blood. This hormone increased neural activity for food source, for food intake, and together stimulate stomach for preparing to food intake. That's why processes of neuroregulation, hormonal regulation, synchronized together with neural regulation through hormones like ghrelin, and for improve efficiency of common neurohormonal regulation. In general, regulation of gastric juice production we divide on stages. Early stage named cephalic stage, and in this stage regulation take place by neural mechanisms from parasympathetic neuron system, and lead to production small amount of gastric juice reached by hydrochloric acid and by pepsinogen for activation, pepsinogen for converting to pepsin. And second stage named gastric phase, when local neuron system and together with hormonal regulation from ghrelin and gastrin production lead to additional production large amount of gastric juice. And this stage happened about 15 minutes after food intake, not so fast like cephalic stage, but the more powerful combination of neural and hormonal mechanisms together give ability for produced much more gastric juice, and this activity may happen during longer period of time. And third, intestinal phase of regulation, gastric juice secretion. It's negative regulation, and role of this intestinal phase in decreasing gastric juice secretion when food came from stomach into small intestine. In this case, we need to stop hydrochloric acid production for prevent from damage our stomach. And this decreasing activity of gastric juice realized mostly with help of humoral factors, with help of hormones which produced by intestine, hormones like somatostatin, cholecystokinin, gastroinhibitory peptide. All these hormones lead to decreasing activity of chief cells and parietal cells, and gastric juice stop the production. So this is main what I want to tell you about digestion in oral cavity and in stomach. On next week, I told you about digestion in intestine and a role of glands like liver and pancreas in digestion. Have you any questions?
No, thank you.
Okay. See you next week. До свидания.
До свидания.